Good evening, Dharma friends, those in person and online. Welcome to Tibetan Buddhist Society, Rongton Buddhist Training College, Thursday evening philosophy classes. This is week 3 of term 3, 2026. My name's Jamyang. I'll be leading this session as Rinpoche is away overseas. So we'll begin with the refuge and generation of bodhicitta, page 3 if you've got your prayer book there. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. Now do the requesting the teachings, page 9. According to the intelligence and predisposition of each being, we ask that you turn the Dharma wheel of the great, low and common vehicles. Now we do the Heart Sutra, page 11. We'll do the mantra 21 times. The perfection of wisdom is beyond thought and expression. Being unborn and unceasing, its nature is the sky. I pay homage to the domain of discriminating self-awareness, the mother of victors of the 3 times. Thus I have heard at one time the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajgriha in Vulture's Peak, together with the great assembly of sangha and a great assembly of Bodhisattvas. At that time the Blessed One was absorbed in samadhi on the enumeration of phenomena called the profound illumination. Also at that time the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the superior Avalokiteshvara, was contemplating the meaning of the profound perfection of wisdom, and he saw that the 5 aggregates are also empty of inherent existence. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the superior Avalokiteshvara, how should a son or daughter of a good lineage train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the superior Avalokiteshvara, said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of good lineage wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should view in this way. They should correctly view those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, in the same way, all phenomena are merely empty, they are without characteristic. They are not created, they do not cease, they have no impurity, they are not devoid of impurity, they do not decrease and increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element and so forth, up to no mind element and up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so forth. There is no aging and death and no exhaustion of aging and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no cessation, no path, no exalted wisdom, no attainment and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they depend on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Because their mind is without obstructions, they are without fear. Having completely passed beyond all error, they go to the completion of nirvana. All Buddhas who abide in the three times, having relied upon the perfection of wisdom, become manifestly perfect Buddhas in the state of unsurpassed, perfect and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all sufferings. Because it is not false, it should be known as the truth. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Tajata Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhisvaha. Shariputra, a Bodhisattva and Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom in that way. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the superior Avalokiteshvara, well done, well done, well done. One of good lineage is just so. One of the good lineages is like that. The profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught it. Even the Tathagatas will rejoice in this. The Blessed One having so spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the superior Avalokiteshvara, and all that are gathered there and those of the world, the gods, humans, demigods, Gandharvas, were filled with admiration and praised the words of the Blessed One. So welcome again, everyone, to Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. Much can be understood from the mere title of a text, at least in some cases. In this case, letter to a friend is quite a straightforward title, and I suppose perhaps it's asking us is, do we really feel worthy of having a friend, a noble friend in our life, such as Nagarjuna, someone wise and who can point out the path of the Buddha that the Buddha showed. Buddha is a metaphor, really. It literally means awake. So, of course, conventionally speaking, we're all awake now. It's a metaphor in the sense that it's the word Buddha, when applied to a person, is someone who has awakened from the sleep of ignorance or the sleep of misconception. So it means to be awake, to become conscious. It can also mean to recover. For example, if someone has fainted. So to recover what? To recover our sanity, to recover our goodness in relating to others, to recover all aspects of our life. So really, if we're here listening to these teachings, as we are doing throughout this course, I think we really could hopefully say that we're willing to listen to the advice that Nagarjuna is pointing out in this particular text. Now, to contextualize where we are, this particular translation that Rinpoche lent me the book of It's called Nagarjuna's Letter to Gautami Putra. So it was printed in the late 70s, published in the late 70s by a few students of His Holiness Sakya-Trizin. And what I wanted to do was read through the introduction just to give some of the context. There is, by the way, a newer translation. I'll also be reading from Lama Chodak Rinpoche's translation of the verses that he did himself. There's also a newer translation published by Snowline called Nagarjuna's Letter to a Friend, with a commentary by Kangyo Rinpoche, in case you're interested. I'll read through the introduction now. Acharya Nagarjuna holds an almost unequaled place among the ranks of those Buddhist saints who expounded the teaching of the Buddha Shakyamuni for the benefit of the world. As prophesied in the Lanka Avatara Sutra, the Manjushri Mula Kalpa Tantra, as well as in several other discourses of the Buddha, Acharya Nagarjuna revolutionized the interpretation of the doctrine of the Enlightened One, which was current at his time, and lent it a vitality and dynamism which has continued to sustain it even to our day among the votaries of the Mahayana. Votary is another word for devotee. The revolution which Acharya Nagarjuna accomplished within the fold of Buddhism was not, as some might think, a radical departure from the original doctrine of the Buddha Shakyamuni. On the contrary, the adherents of the Madhyamaka school are undoubtedly justified in asserting that their interpretation represents the true import of the doctrine of the Buddha and the essence of Buddhism. Although it is not our purpose here to substantiate this claim, it may simply be said that its truth has not escaped the notice of competent scholars in the field. Given the majesty of Acharya Nagarjuna's name and the importance of the role which he played in the development of Buddha's thought, it is not surprising that the story of his life and achievements, as traditionally told, should partake of the fabulous and the legendary. In recounting the life of the Acharya, his biographers have invariably included elements which, though undoubtedly facts of religious history, are difficult to establish in actuality. While an English translation of one of the many biographies of Acharya Nagarjuna, which are extant in the Tibetan language, is certainly desirable, it is a task of no small magnitude. Hence, for the purpose of introduction to this present work, we have chosen to confine ourselves to a brief account of the life of the Acharya based upon facts which can be established with relative certainty, drawing upon the accounts of the traditional biographers, only insofar as they do not contradict these facts. Acharya Nagarjuna lived sometime during the last quarter of the 1st century of the Common Era and the 1st quarter of the 2nd century Common Era. This is evident from his acknowledged friendship with a king of the Shatavahana line of Andhra. The king, Gautami Putra Shatakarni, son of Queen Balashri, was the only one of his line to embrace Buddhism, and it was for him that Acharya Nagarjuna wrote the Suhaleka, that's this text, and Ratnavali. That the king in question reigned at about the time indicated is certain from the evidence of present archaeological discoveries. The traditional biographers agree that the Acharya was born in a Brahmin family of South India. The Tibetan accounts state that at his birth, astrologers prophesied, that the child would not live beyond the age of 7. Unable to bear the sight of his premature death, the accounts tell us, his parents sent the boy to a Buddhist monastery where, by reciting the Aparimita Udarani, he succeeded in escaping his fate. The account given by Kumarajiva of Acharya Nagarjuna's early life differs substantially from that of the Tibetan biographers. It is mentioned here that only because it is presumably earlier than the latter, and so perhaps deserves consideration. Kumara Jiva writes that in his youth, Acharya Nagarjuna was overcome with lust, and through the art of invisibility seduced women in the royal palace. Once, however, he narrowly escaped death at the hands of the guards, an experience which led him to dwell upon the Buddha's teaching that desire is the foremost cause of suffering. As a result, according to Kumara Jiva, the Acharya entered the Buddhist order. Thereafter, the Tibetan accounts state, Nagarjuna became a student of Rahula Bhadra, also known as Mahasiddha Saraha, who was then the abbot of the great university at Nalanda, or Nalendra. You can still see the ruins of Nalendra Monastery. I've been there with a pilgrimage group. Very famous Buddhist university. Virtually all the traditional biographers agree that Acharya Nagarjuna procured some Prajna Paramita sutras from the Nagas. So Nagas are like serpent-like creatures. I'm not sure if they're completely mythical or what, but they are said to be guardians of this particular class of literature, Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Though some have suggested that this term may have been used to indicate a band of great yogis, the exact significance of the reference remains uncertain. Finally, Acharya Nagarjuna seems to have spent the latter part of his life at the monastery built for him by his friend and patron, King Gautami Putra at Sri Parvata. So that's the king who received this letter. Although the accounts given of the manner of the Acharya's death differ with regard to the detail, they agree in that Nagarjuna consented to his own death at the hands of the son of King Gautami Putra. Acharya Nagarjuna was an accomplished master of Buddhist doctrine. He wrote voluminously on almost every aspect of Buddhist philosophy and religion. Although Acharya Nagarjuna has rightly won the widespread acclaim as the foremost exponent of the middle way, or Madhyama Pratipad, and as a master of dialectic, his writings also include works on Vinaya, on Tantra, on the career of the Bodhisattva, and on the practice of the Paramitayana. Among the latter are counted his commentary on the Dasha Bhumika Sutra, the Sutra Samuchaya, and others. Acharya Nagarjuna also wrote works of a highly devotional character, such as the Chatush Stava. It is lamentable that thus far so few of the writings of the Acharya have been made available in English translation. It is hoped that in the years to come this situation may be remedied, and that the publication of this short work of Nagarjuna's in English may contribute in a small degree to that process. The Suher Leka, so Suher, as I explained last week, Suherd literally means good heart. Leka means letter. So Suherd is good heart, in other words, a friend, and Leka means letter, so letter to a friend, the Suher Leka. The Suher Leka of Acharya Nagarjuna is a concise and comprehensive summary of Buddhist teaching. It can generally be said to belong to a class of texts which later came to be called, in Tibet, those of the graduated path, or Lamrim. The works of Nagarjuna, most especially the Sutra Samuchaya, but also to a lesser degree the Suher Leka, were the forerunners of a multitude of texts which can be classed under the name Lamrim. They include such works as the Shiksha Samuchaya of Shantideva, the Jewel Ornament of Liberation of Gampopa, and the Clarification of the Thought of the Sage, or these days translated as Illuminating the Sage's Intent, the sage being the Buddha, by Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyatsen Pao Zangpo. It is not surprising that the concise style and comprehensive content of a work, like Nagarjuna's Suhaleka, should have rendered it so popular as a vehicle for conveying in brief the teaching of Buddhism. That the Suhaleka enjoyed such popularity even in India is evident from the account of the Chinese pilgrim, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, I Tsing maybe, it's the letter I, hyphen Tsing, who visited India in the 7th century. For he writes, in India, students learn this epistle means letter, in verse early in the course of instruction, but the most devout make it their special object of study throughout their lives. Today also, the Suhaleka enjoys widespread popularity among Tibetans who use it with regularity as a basic manual for teaching Buddhist Dharma. Hence it may be ventured that its translation in English will prove useful for those who wish to acquire a fundamental grasp of Buddhist religion. The comprehensive character of the work, though short, renders it highly suitable for use as an introduction to the whole of Buddhism. As it was written principally for lay people, addressed as it was to the Shatavahana king, with whom Nagarjuna shared a lifelong friendship, the teachings it encompasses can be appreciated by a wide spectrum of readers with varying interests. Those scholars and academics seeking clarification of abstruse points of the doctrine of the Madhyamikas may find little to satisfy them in the Suhaleka. Those who desire a concise and comprehensive manual of instruction in the doctrine and practice of Buddhist philosophy and religion will surely not be disappointed. Though the Suhaleka contains elements which belong specifically to the Mahayana, much of its content comprises a common foundation with both the Hinayana, in other words the Pali text, and the Mahayana share. Mahayana is Sanskrit text. The latter commences with an invocation to cultivate faith in that which is preeminent and exalted, such as the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. There follows a lengthy summary of ethical and religious precepts which, if adhered to, result in birth in the fortunate realms of men and gods. As Acharya Nagarjuna writes, morality is said to be the foundation of all virtues, just as the earth is the support of both animate and inanimate things. The injunctions and prohibitions set forth in the text are accompanied by practices which are to be employed to counteract non-virtuous propensities. As Arya Nagarjuna, Arya means noble or sublime, says in the 40th verse, we won't quite cover that this week, always meditate rightly on love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Of equal importance is the portion of the text designed to remove erroneous views produced from ignorance. For morality practiced in ignorance does not result in liberation. However, through the combination of morality and wisdom, the understanding of emptiness, liberation is attained. This emptiness, the ultimate truth, is revealed through dispelling erroneous views. Ultimate truth is written with capital initials, capital U and capital T. Death, impermanence, and opportune conditions form the subject matter for the subsequent verses of the text. Since life is transient like a bubble of water caught by the wind, Nagarjuna exhorts the reader who has obtained the opportune conditions, which are prerequisites for the practice of Dharma, to strive for liberation without delay. If this human birth is not properly utilized, then one will continue to experience the sufferings of the 6 realms of samsara, which are then described by Nagarjuna. Such descriptions are commonly met with in texts of this kind. They are designed to produce a revulsion for worldly existence and a desire for liberation. The reader meeting with these descriptions for the first time should be warned against dismissing them as a fanciful imagination, for they perform a vitally important function in the process of liberation. Since the highest goal of freedom and enlightenment cannot be achieved unless and until an attachment to the world is relinquished, the detailed descriptions of the manifold sufferings experienced are necessary in order to produce that renunciation which is essential to tread the path of liberation. It should be remembered that the truth of suffering is the first of the 4 noble truths and the very cornerstone of the Buddhist religion. Acharya Nagarjuna's letter concludes with a description of the path and the unequaled result to be gained through its practice. Morality, concentration, and the wisdom arising from the understanding of the precious doctrine of interdependent origination comprise the path resulting in the exalted state of a Bodhisattva or Buddha. Hence, as it was said before, Acharya Nagarjuna's Suhalekha provides the aspirant who wishes to be acquainted with the essentials of the Buddha's path to liberation with a comprehensive summary of the principles of the Buddhist religion. The foundation of correct moral conduct and right understanding of the truth free from the obscurations of ignorance results in a transcendent mode of being in which not only is freedom from bondage and ignorance achieved, but also the capacity to nurture and mature all living beings that they may also attain enlightenment. So I thought that was quite an interesting read as an introduction. What I'd like to do now is go through the 4 other verses. I went through verses 1 to 4 last week, which Rinpoche covered in the first week. I'd like to now go through verses 5, 6, 7 and 8, which he also went through, but I'll read the commentary found in this book, which is a verbal commentary given by His Holiness 41st Sakya Chen, based on the existing Tibetan commentaries. And the actual verses, I'll read Rinpoche's translations. So verse 5. Constantly practice the 10 paths of virtuous action through body, speech and mind. Abstain from intoxicants and likewise take delight in a virtuous livelihood. It is necessary that the commentary says, it is necessary that one constantly practice the 10 precepts. This is the practice of the right path which leads one to the right result. Therefore, one must avoid these 10 non-virtuous actions, 3 of the body, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, 4 of the voice, lying, slander, malicious speech and idle speech, and 3 of the mind, covetousness, malevolence, and erroneous views. Verse 6. Recognizing wealth to be ephemeral and insubstantial, practice right giving toward bhikshus, Brahmins, the poor, and spiritual friends. In the next world, there is no better friend than giving. Meaning, for the sake of our existence in the next life, there is no better friend than giving in this life. So our practice, our practice of what giving is considered a perfection usually, a paramita is loosely translated as perfection. Transcendent means to transcend. So to practice right giving. When we talk about right speech, right giving, and this type of thing, right is not too bad a translation. It means it's the translation of the Sanskrit samyak, which has an interesting etymology both in the Sanskrit and the Tibetan. Samyak in Sanskrit has a sense of authentic or genuine, authentic or genuine. The Tibetans translated samyak as yang dak. Yang means again, dak means pure. So it means pure again. In other words, if you check your pure giving, then it's good. If you check it again, it's still good. So it has a similar idea to the Sanskrit in that it's authentic. If something's authentic, you can check it once, you can check it again, you can check it again, and it's still pure. And so bhikshus refers to, strictly speaking, fully ordained monks. I might have a quick look at the Tibetan to see what word they used. Verse 6, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, gelong. So they use the word. The Tibetans translated it literally as bhikshu, from the Sanskrit word bhikshu. So bhikshu literally means a beggar, someone who subsists on almsgiving. So it's talking about giving, right giving toward bhikshus, or bhikkhus in the Pali as opposed to the Sanskrit. Brahmins, meaning the priestly caste of ancient India. The poor, it's good to give not only to exalted recipients, but also those who are worthy of charity. And then it says, and spiritual friends. And this is to be done by right giving is to be done by recognizing wealth to be ephemeral and insubstantial. In other words, we'd make the offering having some appreciation of its illusory quality. This means that it'll be less likely for us to cling to it, or to have some clinging to the act of giving. One should give to monks and Brahmins because of their auspicious qualities, says the commentary. To parents, teachers and spiritual friends because of their kindness, and to the hungry and sick people because of their need. As it is said in the Abhidharma Kosha, which is the treasury of the metaphysics, immeasurable merit will be obtained if one gives to incarnate bodhisattvas or even to non-nobles like father, mother, sick people and dharma teachers. Furthermore, always keep in mind that wealth has no essence because it is continually changing hands and is subject to decay and loss. That's verse 6. Verse 7, Rinpoche's translation reads, rely on an unbroken and blameless morality which is not mixed and uncorrupted. Morality is the foundation for all virtues, as is the earth for all animate and inanimate things. The commentary states, just as one views the earth as the foundation of everything in the world, so one should view moral discipline as the foundation of all worldly and beyond worldly qualities, as well as trances and wisdom. When it says trances, I think it means what we'd call these days meditative absorption. As the Shila Samyukta Sutra says, just as a good vase is a receptacle of jewels, so moral discipline is the foundation of the growth of dharmas, i.e. virtues. Furthermore, morality is the very basis for the final attainment of the freedom of nirvana. Morality is endowed, says the commentary, with 4 special qualities. First, it is called unimpaired because its rules are not broken and the faults which result in their transgression are avoided. Second, it is called blameless because attachment to the cause, i.e. the afflictions of breaking the vows, is abandoned. Third, it is called not mixed because it is entirely free from non-virtuous thoughts. It is unmixed with the impure because the correctives of the afflictions are constantly practiced. Fourth, it is called unsullied because the attainment of supreme enlightenment rather than worldly wealth or activityless nirvana is aspired to. And there's a footnote there. Activityless nirvana, or what we call abiding nirvana, as opposed to non-abiding nirvana, is the Shravakas nirvana. So that's the nirvana of the Shravakas are the hearers of the Buddha, the disciples, as opposed to the Mahayana people. Therefore, personal freedom is not complemented by the transcendental activities of a Buddha. So there are 2 types of nirvana. According to the Mahayana, this nirvana, activityless nirvana, or the Shravakas nirvana, is something to be avoided. Next is the counsel to practice the 6 perfections of the Mahayana. So this is verse 8, the last from week 1. Giving, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and likewise wisdom, develop these immeasurable paramitas, and having crossed the ocean of existence, become the Lord of victors. This is a kind of play on words because paramita literally means something like to reach the further shore, which is a bit difficult to translate exactly into English. We just say perfection usually. But I think what they're trying to say, what Nagarjuna is trying to say in this verse, is that you're crossing the ocean of existence to become the Lord of victors, i.e. the Buddha. So you can see in this verse how memorizing a text like this would be very beneficial for example, for a monk, because here it lists all the 6 perfections in order, because they have a specific order for a important purpose. So this is where, as for example, now we have different translations and stuff. We might not memorize this type of text word for word, but it's good to know the 6 perfections, and it's good to know their order. It starts with giving, then morality, third is patience, then diligence, or enthusiasm. See, even the perfections themselves can be translated differently. Then concentration or meditation, and then 6th is wisdom, the most important one. What we call prajna paramita. Prajna means wisdom. So, yeah, that's a great verse that summarizes the perfections, having just talked about avoiding the activityless nirvana. I'll read the commentary to verse 8, and then we'll jump to this week's readings. All the paths of the Mahayana tradition are encompassed within the 6 perfections, paramitas. These 6 are divided into 2 groups, which are called the accumulation of merit, i.e. giving, morality and patience, and the accumulation of knowledge, i.e. concentration and wisdom. Energy, or what Rinpoche translates as diligence, is included in both groups, merit and wisdom, as it is needed in all spheres of activities and qualities. Whether the Bodhisattvas, the great beings, be in samsara or nirvana, all of his or her requirements are fulfilled by these 2 accumulations. While in samsara, the Bodhisattva, who is possessed of the nature of the 6 perfections, avoids the faults of worldly existence in addition to helping other living beings. While remaining in samsara, the Bodhisattva, by means of the perfections of giving, morality, patience, and energy, or diligence, dwells in happiness. Having access to the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, he or she fulfills the needs of living beings. I'll go back to these kayas in a minute. Having attained enlightenment, the Bodhisattva dwells in happiness by means of the perfections of concentration and wisdom. Furthermore, having attained liberation, the Bodhisattva will be able to acquire the Dharmakaya through transcendental concentration and wisdom. So these 3 kayas these 3 kayas are very important, and they're good to know as well. They're usually written in the Sanskrit, even though they have been translated into Tibetan. First is Nirmanakaya. So kaya means body in Sanskrit, but it has when it's translated into Tibetan, it has what's called an honorific sense. Kaya is translated into Tibetan as ku, spelled SKU in Wylie, whereas regular body which is called Lu, is written Lu, L-U-S. So this is not talking about a regular body, regular perishable body that will disintegrate. That's actually implied, by the way, by the etymology of the word Lu, the non-honorific word for body in Tibetan, which literally means something like remainder. It's something that remains after you're going to go to your next life. So very Buddhist-inspired etymology there. So first is Nirmanakaya. Nirmana in Sanskrit means emanation or manifestation. Sambhogakaya, Sambhoga means complete enjoyment. So, and then Dharmakaya, Dharma here means truth or reality, and Kaya means body. So truth body or reality body. Kaya could almost be translated as dimension. So we have the emanation dimension, we have the complete enjoyment dimension, and we have the dimension of reality. You can also see these three, which is quite common to see these three grouped together, as divided into only two. So the Nirmanakaya plus the Sambhogakaya combine to make what's called the Rupakaya, which means form body. Rupa means form. And then the Dharmakaya is invisible. So it's Arupakaya, which means non-form body. Once we get into the Kayas, it's quite esoteric, but that can probably suffice. They're usually translated just as body. Sometimes it's translated, a book I'm reading at the moment translates them as Buddha bodies, which is looking into it a bit and saying something a bit much that is not really there, to be honest, in the original. But something like body or dimension is its meaning. Like a body of literature or a body of thought, like a system. So these three kayas have very interesting, sort of almost mystical meaning in Buddhist thought. There are analogies, but none of them come into mind at the moment. You can read about them. So, now we're going to jump to verse 24. As last week we covered up to verse 23. And we'll do about 15 verses today. 24. Victors over the six ever unstable and wavering... I'll start again. Victors over the six ever unstable and wavering senses, and victors over a host of enemies in battle. The wise view the first as being the greater heroes. I believe this, when it talks like this, talks in very hyperbolic language, but I believe this to be literally true. Conquering oneself is more powerful than conquering others. The texts are very adamant about that. This is a very Mahayanic language. What I mean by that is it's depicting that of what we might call a spiritual warrior. It encourages us to be fearless and feel protected on the spiritual path. And so this employs this type of language to be heroic, not in a worldly sense, which is what we sort of traditionally think of heroes as, superheroes and whatnot, but to encourage ourselves, to give ourselves that kind of zeal and right effort, as we might call it, to continue on the path, despite any lingering doubts and so forth that we may have. I'll read the commentary. One must never allow his or her senses to become entangled with the afflictions. If one combats his or her afflictions by disengaging his or her senses from them, the battle has then been won. See, it talks about enlightenment as a battle. Very amazing, using this sort of maybe an instinct that we might have towards, for lack of a better term, warfare. And it's using this to describe a battle within, that we can that we can fulfill through our faith in the path that we're generating by reading texts such as this. If one can act in such a manner, he or she is braver and more heroic than the victor on the battlefield. Even animals can win in battle, but few are able to conquer the senses. That's 24. The next topic is to consider the faults of the object of attachment and of the subject who is attached. Rinpoche's translation reads, "A woman's body is foul-smelling with 9 orifices. It contains filth, difficult to fill. Although adorned by skin, view it otherwise." So this was obviously written to a male, and obviously the roles can be reversed and can just as easily be applied to a female. It's also important to remember that this is implicitly directing one to one's own physical impurities. It's not talking about just the other, it's talking about one's own as well. And it starts by saying the other is impure. But the whole story is that the other is impure and one is just as impure. If we don't have this holistic understanding about it, it's very easy to misunderstand a verse like this and even get upset by it. So the commentary to this one says, the remedy for the desire for women should be considered in the following manner. First, one should imagine a woman with beautiful clothes and ornaments, but reflect that, inside, she is impure. Secondly, having taken away the decorations, one discovers that she is impure and without, as well as within. In other words, she or he is only a heap of flesh, bones, blood, and so forth. A woman is truly similar to a beautiful vase that is filled with impurities. So obviously it can replace woman with man as necessary. Verse 26, Rinpoche's translation reads, "Understand the desire for sense objects is like a leper's craving for comfort. Tormented by maggots, he or she relies on fire, but is not soothed." So this is quite a, I guess we could call it a medieval metaphor, which we do find of here and there. Classical Buddhist texts such as Nagarjuna and Shantideva are certainly not necessarily confined to postmodern sensibilities. So it's talking about the old-fashioned idea of a leper who apparently when you get leprosy, if you put your arm or whatever's affected by it near a fire, near a flame, that actually eases the pain a bit. But in the long run, it just makes it worse. So what it's saying here is that desire is like, we'll go into the commentary in a sec, but desire is like craving for comfort that does not, it doesn't fulfill its purpose of easing the craving, but it only makes it worse. Salt water, I think, is the example given. It only makes one thirstier. So worldly pleasures are like salt water. This is again, as we saw in some verses last week, this again is pointing to moderation, I think. It's not giving an absolute, as we might interpret if we read it at a superficial level, but it's pointing to having moderation in our life. So it gives examples of short-term relief that only worsens the situation in the long run. There's a famous Buddhist quote that's preserved in the Tibetan tradition, which says, "Some enjoyments are like honey on a razor blade." In other words, it's very difficult to to be involved with such pleasures without potentially causing some risk to oneself and others. And despite all this, there are, and even living examples today, of householder practitioners who are successful in both family life and their spiritual life. So we need to keep that in mind as well. So the commentary to verse 26 says, "The more one enjoys worldly pleasures, the more he or she wants them. This is like a thirsty person who drinks salt water, which only increases his or her thirst. In this way, worldly pleasures are never satisfactory. As it says in a particular sutra, and I'll give the Tibetan title, the Kolo Gyurwe Tamje Pe Do, sentient beings who rely upon passion will further increase their desires. If one closely clings to the object of desire, his or her desire will never be satisfied." So I think here it's talking about having a degree of contentment. One should try to free his or her mind from desires for worldly pleasures by first thinking of the bad results which they will bring. Having considered desire in this way, then try to put a stop to that which the desire immediately. Worldly pleasures lead only to more suffering, as the placing of a leprous arm in a fire. That finishes verse 26 as well as that topic. And the next topic is to uproot the causes of attachment. And the first in this is meditation to uproot the causes of attachment. Verse 27. To see the ultimate truth, familiarize the mind with right involvement toward phenomena. There is no other dharma so virtuous. This ultimate truth, there's quite a long commentary here, is what is called emptiness, shunyata. So shunyata in Sanskrit literally means emptiness. It's a perfect translation. Shunya means empty, ta means ness. And even with the Tibetan, tongpa nyi. Tongpa means empty, nyi means ness. So it's very plain translation. People wonder all the time, is this the right translation? Shouldn't we be talking about fullness instead of emptiness if we're talking about interdependence, that things are full of each other or things are full of themselves? That's in some respects a subtle distinction, but for some reason Buddha decided emptiness was closer to reality, the way things are. When the Tibetans did do their big project going over many generations of translating Sanskrit terms, at first they were just trying to decide between that term, tongpa nyi, literally saying emptiness, and a term which is called ye jam. Ye means timeless, jam means infinity. So timeless infinity. Why they chose not to use this term in the end, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. Maybe because it sounds a bit eternalistic. In any case, emptiness is what we have. It's a very important but subtle teaching. There's the classic example of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's, as we know, is keen to do this sort of interfaith type of activity. And I think there was a Catholic priest, asked him, he read a book about Buddhism, and he asked His Holiness, what's this idea of emptiness? He was very intrigued by it. And His Holiness answered to him, none of your business. So it's very it's a very advanced teaching. If you say it to an average person without explaining the context and so forth, I think, there is the risk of interpreting it as some sort of nihilism, isn't there? So I think that's there is actually a vow in the Bodhisattva vows which says not to teach emptiness to beginners. It's very what we might call a synonym of emptiness is what we call dependent origination. This is a much safer term to work with because it explains that things originate in dependence on things around them. So, it is said in lots of texts that while emptiness and interdependent origination may not obviously be saying exactly the same thing, they're pointing to the same truth. So it's good to use this term, dependent origination. You can even learn the Sanskrit of it, which is praticya samutpada. So, I'll read the commentary. It talks about what we call in this tradition a tetralemma. So you know the word dilemma, which di means two, lemma means, I'm not sure exactly in the Greek or whatever, but dilemma means two possible solutions. So tetralemma, tetra means four, so tetralemma means four possible solutions. There's existence, there's non-existence, there's both, and there's neither. So those are the four possibilities that are refuted in this. And this is classical Nagarjuna stuff that's talked about here. So those four extremes are said to be the essence of Madhyamaka. We'll take a short break after I've finished this verse. So I'll read the commentary. One should look for the truth of all dharmas. The term dharma, which in Buddhism has various meanings, may be understood to mean here the constituent elements of existence, i.e. the five aggregates, as we read in the Heart Sutra, form, feeling, perception, predispositions and consciousness, and external things. If one carefully examines all dharmas, then he or she will see that not a single atom really exists. If one views dharmas with the understanding of the ultimate truth and meditates on emptiness, shunyata, then there is no better teaching to purify karma and to destroy the afflictions. Without a doubt, the best teaching, dharma, is the understanding of emptiness. As it is said in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, karma and afflictions arise from conceptualizations. These arise from mental creations, and creations are extinguished by emptiness. Though everything in samsara is ultimately not existent, nevertheless things as they appear and as are experienced, i.e. things arisen from causes and conditions, are not denied. When seen as interdependent origination, everything is dependent on other things for its existence. That is, everything is devoid of own being. The essence of Lord Buddha's teaching is in the 12 links of interdependent origination. The reason for this is, 1, things are not born from themselves, i.e. the cause and effect are not identical. 2, things are not born from others, i.e. the cause and effect are not different. 3, things are not born both from themselves and from others, i.e. the cause and the effect are not both identical and different. And 4, things are not born neither from themselves nor from others, i.e. the cause and effect being neither identical nor different, therefore arising without cause. According to the Madhyamaka, these doctrines, and this is what Nagarjuna is known for, this type of thinking, very subtle, are proven false, since no truth is found in them. In fact, the Madhyamaka has no doctrine concerning the ultimate truth of its own to prove, but only examines those of others. This is what Nagarjuna is famous for, having nothing to defend. His system of Madhyamaka is used as a tool to disprove other systems. The ultimate truth, again with capital initials, is impossible to explain through logic, reason, words, examples, and so forth. No one can tell another what the ultimate truth is. It can only be seen through one's own realization, which is termed the self-seen wisdom. Okay, let's stretch our legs for just a few minutes, and then we'll continue with the rest of the verses. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We're up to verse 28 now. I'll read Rinpoche's translation. One high-born, handsome and learned, yet lacking wisdom and morality, is not worthy of the respect. One possessing those two qualities but lacking others should be venerated. So I'll read the commentary first. Sakya Pandita said in his text, Legshe Rinpoche Der, even though one possesses high caste, lineage, family, good form and youth, if one does not have knowledge, he is not handsome. We could say, or she. One is not thought to be a superior person, nor considered worthy of worship, if he or she is born in a high family or possesses a good complexion, much wealth, much learning, many virtues, fame, etc. However, those who understand shunyata, though they may not possess the above qualities, are worthy of worship. As it is said in the Jataka, so Jataka means the previous lives of the Buddha. It's a genre of Buddhist literature. Very interesting. One example that's relevant if you ever go on pilgrimage to, for example, to Nepal, just outside Kathmandu is a valley where the Buddha, in a previous life, as a prince in a previous life, offered his body to a hungry tigress and her cubs. And he threw himself down and fed himself to the tigress. And that place is called Namo Buddha, and it's still a shrine. It's still, to this day, has stupas and prayer flags all around and everything. You can go there. I've also been there on pilgrimage as well. So that's one previous life of the Buddha. As it is said in the Jataka, so Ja means birth in Sanskrit, Jataka. If one does not practice well giving, moral discipline, etc., when it says etc., it means giving, morality, and the rest of the perfections, right? Even though he or she possesses high lineage, good form, qualities of youth, very great strength and wealth, still he or she will never obtain happiness in his or her next life. So this is extending our short-term expectations and seeing how they can benefit in future lives, which is one step better than just wanting something successful for the now. This is where the idea of rebirth can be very liberating, because it can help us to not try and think we have to get everything perfect in this life. We can do incremental changes and transformation, hopefully, but we don't have to think like it's all or nothing and it's just this life. We can give ourselves a break, so to speak, if we think in terms of this is an improvement, I've done my best, and it's a project that can be worked on in future lives as well. That can be liberating, thinking like that. Having belief in rebirth and karma is more or less a given in Buddhism. Generally speaking, the idea behind Buddha Dharma is to stop being reborn based on afflictions, right? So if we don't have a belief in karma and rebirth in the first place, then that doesn't quite make sense. Of course, writings of Shantideva and so forth turn this around and say, as long as world existence, as long as people are suffering, may I be reborn to help them, and this type of thing. So there are creative ways in which later thinkers changed the idea of how we can use this idea of rebirth and so forth. Even the quote goes on, the Jataka quote goes on to say, even though one possesses low lineage, etc., if one is not attached to sin and possesses well the qualities of giving, moral discipline, etc., i.e. the perfections, then just as the rivers fill the ocean during the monsoon season, so he or she will certainly increase his or her happiness in the next life. Wisdom and morality have been praised by Acharya Nagarjuna for those who wish to understand the ultimate truth. One cannot be holy if he or she lacks wisdom and morality. Since wisdom reveals that which is to be accepted and that which is to be abandoned, it is essential for the attainment of sainthood. 29. The world knower, said the 8 worldly dharmas are gain and loss, happiness and unhappiness, kind and harsh words, and praise and blame. Exercise equanimity, as these are unworthy of the mind. This is a very important teaching that you'll find not just here. It's talking about the 8 worldly concerns, and it consists of 4 pairs, one being positive and one being negative. I'm not sure if you caught that. So gain is positive, loss is we usually want to avoid. Happiness is good, we want that, we want to avoid unhappiness. Kind words are good, we want to avoid harsh words, and praise is good, blame we want to avoid. So it's called worldly dharma, or worldly concerns, because it consists of what we like in a worldly sense and what we don't like in a worldly sense. And both of them are meant to be treated with equanimity. A very important teaching. It's worth memorizing these. It's actually easy because if you translate them in a particular way, they rhyme. So gain, fame, pain, and blame. Those 4 rhyme, right? So gain, the opposite is loss. Pain, the opposite is pleasure. Fame, the opposite is infamy or obscurity. And blame, the opposite is praise. So it's so important to remember these as a Dharma practitioner. They're very potent teaching. It's a very potent teaching. I think I'll touch on this again a bit later on. I'll read the commentary. Of the 8 worldly dharmas, the 4 which are desired by worldlings are gain, i.e. acquisition of material wealth, etc., pleasure or happiness, sweet or pleasing speech, i.e. fame, etc., and praise. If one receives any of these 4, he becomes happy. He or she becomes happy. One always strives and seeks for these, and if he or she obtains them, he or she is very pleased. However, of the 8 worldly dharmas, the 4 which are not desired are loss of wealth, etc., unhappiness or pain, i.e. of misery of both mind and body, harsh or unpleasant speech, i.e. slander, notoriety, contempt, etc., and blame or criticism. These 4 are always feared and result in great unhappiness when they're experienced. However, this is not a suitable attitude for one who wishes to practice religion. As Shantideva said in the Bodhicharya Avatara, even though one acquires many gains, fame and praise, it is uncertain whether the accumulation of fame and wealth will be lost. One should neither hope for the first 4 conditions nor fear the last 4. Finding no difference among them, neither striving in the 4 pleasant ones nor avoiding the 4 unpleasant ones, the person practicing religion should regard the 8 worldly dharmas as equal. So really pointing to what a genuine practitioner is like. Verse number 30 says, do not commit sins for the sake of Brahmins, monks, gods, guests, parents, queens or retinue. They will not be able to share the smallest part of the result of hell. This is encouraging us to be independent and responsible, not do things for other people, not do bad things for other people, because it'll be our karma. One should avoid collecting sins, says the commentary, for one's own ends, or for the sake of others, whether they be preceptors, monks, teachers, deities, mother, father, queen, etc. Even if one were to commit a sin for another, the result of that action is still borne by oneself and not by the other. One must bear the full result of any sins in him or herself, just as one must bear the suffering of illness alone. As it is said in the Sutras, the result of deeds will not be ripened upon earth, water or stone, but only upon one's aggregates. It may be asked, if sins produce disastrous results, why are they not produced immediately? It is replied, there are three types of results which ripen from non-virtuous actions. First, there are some deeds, the results of which will appear in this very lifetime. For instance, if one were to commit a sinful deed earlier in his life, the result could appear towards the end of his life. Second, there are some deeds performed in this life, the results of which will appear in the subsequent life. Lastly, there are some deeds performed in this life, the results of which will appear only after several lifetimes. Verse 31 says, although performing sinful actions will not instantly cut like a weapon, the results of sinful action will manifest when the time of death arrives. I like to use this example when I introduce Dharma to, in the context, for example, the meditation course that we're currently doing. I like to introduce the Dharma as coming in terms of its Sanskrit etymology, which explains that it comes from the Sanskrit root dur, dh for kalakar, r with the dot underneath. And this dur means to hold or to carry. What it implies is that Dharma carries us through difficulty. It carries us through difficult circumstances such as when we die. Dying is considered to be a difficult circumstance because it's something it's something that is completely confronting as our mind and our body are separating each other. So it's said, the only thing that can support us, that can hold us, so to speak, at the time of death is the Dharma. That's how it gets its name. Only Dharma will help at the time of death, by definition. The commentary to this verse says, though one will not experience immediate retribution for sinful deeds committed, still, when one is caught by the Lord of Death at the time of one's demise, one will experience their disastrous results, such as the intense suffering of the hells. At that time, one will surely know the results of his or her sins. Some people think that since the result of sinful actions are not perceived, they will not experience them. However, this is not so. Verse 32 says, the sage declared the seven noble treasures to be faith, morality, giving, learning, stainlessness, shame, self-restraint, and wisdom. I counted 8. Stainlessness is not in the other translation, so that might be where there's a glitch. Recognize other common treasures as meaningless. In other words, we don't have to be materially rich to own these treasures of the noble ones. It might actually be easier to not be wealthy, to have these true treasures, these noble or these sublime treasures. It's very interesting, I think, how Dharma is depicted traditionally as a form of wealth. For example, being time rich, having a way to support oneself and so forth, but having a bit of time to be able to cultivate the spiritual side of life. For example, even the idea of the triple gem, which we take refuge in, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, i.e. the awakened one, his teaching, and his community, this could be just translated just as justifiably as the three treasures. The Sanskrit word is ratna, which could either mean gem, which is how the Tibetans translated it, or it can mean treasure. So it's these treasures that we've found. This is why we have gold statues in the temple and lots of shiny things, and to brighten our mind and remind us of the luminosity of our mind, which is the Dharma. So yes, sure, we need to survive materially, but this is the most important type of wealth, this treasure. Even studying the Dharma, did you notice? Learning is one of them. Learning or study. In worldly terms, in a materialistic society, we think of study merely as a means to earning a living or something like this. But here, study, the study of Dharma is just such a wealth. It's something to look forward to, and it's something that you can really individualize. And as Buddhists, we're lucky because we have not just, for example, in this context, we're teaching according to the tradition that the Tibetans inherited from India, but we can also, we can study all different types of, all different traditions of Buddhism. We can even look at the original Indian environment in which Buddhism was developed. So it's not necessarily irrelevant to look a bit into the Vedas and this type of thing. One thing that surprised me a bit when I was learning Sanskrit was a few of the things that I thought were just Buddhist phrases were actually just ancient Indian phrases. Like one I can remember off the top of my head is to be as fast as the mind, or to be as fast as a thought. I heard that in the Buddhist context, and I assumed it was a Buddhist idea, but it's actually just a general ancient Indian idea. So you can study. We're very lucky, I think, in the Buddhist tradition. In that context of being able to study a broad range of things to enhance our understanding. So the commentary to this verse 32 says, the seven noble wealths are one, believe in the triple gem, i.e. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the law of karma, and the phenomenal and ultimate truths. 2, adherence to the moral code. 3, bestowing gifts, alms, and so forth. 4, the study of Dharma. 5, the avoidance of non-virtuous actions out of one's own sense of aversion and shame. 6, the avoidance of non-virtuous actions for fear of being condemned by others. And 7, the ability to discriminate between virtuous and non-virtuous deeds so as to determine the right course of action. Now I might add here to the study of the Dharma, you can study Dharma languages too. For example, Sanskrit, Tibetan. Those are the two I've mainly focused on. Then there's Pali. And then there's any number of languages which Buddhist texts have been translated into, such as classical Chinese and so forth. Through study of these languages, you get to know a bit of the etymology and so forth, and what Dharma terms have traditionally meant throughout the generations. So, and this can help because there's so much commentary such as this that I'm reading from, and so many teachings given, for example, by our teacher Lama Chodok Rinpoche, that have been given in English, that need to be typed up, need to be proofread, and need to be edited, and so forth. So the more you study a little bit of the, the Sanskrit terms and so forth, the more adept you'll be at being able to help out with this type of activity. And this type of activity is really incredible because you get to not only read the teachings yourself, so it's like you're listening to the teachings, but you also learn how to express the ideas and how they will fit best into readable English and this type of thing. So it's really beneficial, not just to your own practice, but obviously to many others as well. So this is where even just quite basic grasp of how Tibetan and Sanskrit work and how they interrelate, because the whole project of translating Sanskrit texts into Tibetan was a really huge project, the likes of which was never ever seen in history until about the mid-20th century when the United Nations did some language project. The transmission of this body of knowledge was just really, really incredible, the way they did it. They had terms that they decided on. They said, right, guru means lama. That's it. They didn't have interpretations like spiritual teacher, master, mentor, which we're still sort of playing around with these days in English, and that type of thing. So they had kings who had authority, who would make decisions with translation committees and so forth to decide on particular translations. So it's very incredible the way these two languages interact, Tibetan and Sanskrit. I've got a number of Tibetan to Sanskrit and Sanskrit to Tibetan dictionaries at home. That's just a side note on Dharma study. Dharma study of the Dharma languages should be considered study just as much as any meditation or other study is, as I hope I've made clear. These practices, performed without selfish aims and intentions, are very beneficial. Though one may not be rich in gold and silver, still if one has these 7, he or she possesses the most excellent among all treasures. Furthermore, the 7 wealths are conditions which are conducive to attaining the great bliss of nirvana, which is without suffering. Next is 33, to give up behavior destructive of the wealth of the holy ones. Gambling, watching crowds, laziness, relying on evil company, alcoholism, and loitering at night. Gee, that's quite a reverse as to the previous ones, isn't it? Abandon these 6 which cause the loss of reputation. Yeah, this is where I wanted to go back to the 8 worldly concerns. So loss of reputation, it might seem that contradicts what was said just a few verses before in a verse regarding the 8 worldly concerns, saying the one of fame versus infamy or obscurity. Now, the idea here is that you're protecting your appearance, your reputation, not for yourself, not out of egotism, or not out of self-preservation, but merely to be of more benefit to others. If others can find you reliable and have a sort of, I guess, predictable personality in the sense that you're dependable and this type of thing, it's a good thing. I think this is a very fine but a valid distinction. The 6 things which can destroy the 7 noble wealths are gambling, attendance of fair and festivals, laziness, associating with sinful friends who contribute to one's afflictions, drinking alcohol, and roaming around in the night without any purpose. These 6 faults will be a cause for one to lose fame, etc. in this life, as well as being a cause for one's rebirth into lower realms in his or her subsequent life. Therefore, one should avoid these 6. The next verse is remaining content. Remaining content is conducive to the wealth of the holy ones. Verse 34. The teacher of gods and men described contentment as the greatest of riches. Remain contented always. To know contentment is perfect wealth, even without material things. I find, as a monk and as a Buddhist practitioner, I find contentment as a much more reliable concept and idea than happiness. Happiness is so slippery, and it's so like, love and happiness are so like easily border on attachment, and you know, it comes and goes. You know, you can be really happy about something, and then you know, other things happen and you get distracted by them and so forth. But contentment is more of a decision you make, you know. You can decide to have contentment, and it can be done simply to modify, as we were going through earlier verses talking about curtailing of desire and so forth. It can be done in incremental stages to slowly reduce our afflictions. So it would be good to think, I would rather be content with little rather than miserable with a lot. It's a very empowering idea. As Buddha said, contentment is the highest wealth. That's the Dhammapada, verse 204. And we could say contentment is true happiness. But it's like saying the pursuit of happiness is a little misleading, because we have to decide. We have to decide to be content, and that will make us happy. We could say it like that. The commentary says, one should always be satisfied with whatever one possesses. Greed will always cause one to feel dissatisfied and unhappy. Moreover, anxiety will arise from the desire to acquire more wealth, protect it, etc. Even though a person be poor, if he or she is content with what he or she has, then he or she possesses the greatest wealth and is happy. Again, I take this literally to be true. As it is said in the Bodhicharya Avatara, it should be known that wealth is full of evil consequences through the sufferings of gathering, guarding, and losing it. Having become agitated by the desire for wealth, one will not have the opportunity to be free from the sufferings of existence. So yeah, very, very big theme there, I think, contentment. Are people who won the lottery necessarily content? Maybe in some cases, yes. And in some cases, no, you know. Verse 35. O gentle one, just as those who own much suffer, those with few desires do not. Great Nagas have as many sufferings as heads which produced them. Again, it's referring to moderation. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having a good standard of living, like we have in this country, as long as we're balancing it with some sort of spiritual standard of living. If we become too materialistic, we can become upset when things do go wrong. Just because we're living in a wealthy country doesn't mean we're not living in samsara. Things go wrong. You know, like I think of the example of, it happened just a few weeks ago. I think one of the phone companies went down for half a day or something like that. You know, these things happen whether we're in a third world country or in a first world country, in a developed country or in a developing country. So it's this, but it's this mentality that wanting things to be right and perfect all the time, that this miserable and miserly mentality needs to be replaced with a wealth of contentment. And this is what Nagarjuna is referring to, which I'll refer back to his commentary, to His Holiness's commentary, sorry. One will suffer in proportion to the amount of superfluous property he or she acquires. This is exemplified by the Naga kings who suffer in accordance with the number of heads they possess. Therefore, one should be watchful of his or her desires. We're up to verses 36 and 37, which go together. Now this shows how much this text is aimed at a householder audience rather than a monastic one, because the topic is to know the qualities of a prospective wife. Let's say prospective partner. A wife who, like an executioner, associates naturally with enemies, who like a queen scorns her mate, who like a thief takes even small things, avoid these three types of wife. A wife who, and that's 36, so that's the negative side. Then the next verse, a wife who, like a sister, is harmonious, who like a girlfriend is dear to your heart, who like a mother wishes your benefit, who like a servant obeys, should be honored as a family god. Again, this is written for a male, so we can substitute to some extent the male and female. We can reverse the roles. And to be honest, ancient India was to some extent a patriarchal society, so maybe we just have to accept that as part of the text that we're reading and adopt it to our own way of thinking and sensibility. The commentary goes, we'll finish with the next verse, by the way. As this letter is written for laymen, this counsel is given. The three kinds of women that one should not take as wives are: one who is naturally linked with enemies who desire the demise of the husband; two, one who always wishes to govern and be thought of as the foremost, thereby disrespecting the husband. And 3, one who steals even small things like a thief. Verse 38, this is a new topic. This is counsel to both monks and laymen to practice the Dharma, resulting in heaven and liberation. The general practice of Dharma is firstly to be watchful of the amount of food one takes. Take food properly like medicine, without desire or hatred, nor for pride, robustness or beauty, but only to sustain the body. So this is a very big teaching of contentment again, isn't it? And moderation, both for monks and householders. You know, monks and nuns are traditionally meant to fast each evening. This is something that that not all individual monks and nuns do, but it's very highly respected. So food is only to sustain the body. And we do have a form of grace with meals that we say on retreats, for example. It goes along the line of, in English, precious is the Buddha, the supreme teacher. Precious is the Dharma, the supreme protector. Precious is the Sangha, the supreme of guides. 3 gems, my refuge, please accept this. I offer this carefully made food, mind-pleasing with its 100 tastes, to the victorious ones and their successors. May meditation sustain all beings. So meditation is the real nutrition, is what this is trying to say. We can, and it's food for thought, so to speak. When we do a meditation, we find our mind a bit more open, we find our mind a bit more free, and able to absorb information like this type of studying. What I find interesting is I like to do a bit of reading after I've meditated. And traditionally it goes the other way around. Traditionally it goes study, contemplate, meditate. But I find, for some reason, to do some meditation first and then to do a little bit of reading actually works quite well. I'm not sure why. So meditation is the real nutrition, and food is there to keep our meditation practice strong. So I think there was some commentary to that as well. Keeping in mind that food is only medicine for the illness of hunger, one should always eat moderately. One should neither eat with the intention of acquiring beauty, physical strength or pride, nor with any thought of desire or hatred. Therefore one should eat for the purpose of sustaining the body, so as to practice Dharma. As Shantideva said in the Bodhicharya Avatara, that's the Bodhisattva's way of life, share food with those fallen into evil states, those without protections and with fellow ascetics. Eat moderately and give everything except 3 robes. So on that note, I'd like to conclude the session for today. We'll end with a dedication as usual. What I'd like to do, though, before we do the dedication, is explain that today was an important day for the Tibetan community around the world, in that it was the 7-week anniversary of the Tibetan gentleman who self-immolated in America, which was exactly 7 weeks ago today. So please keep the Tibetans and their cause in your hearts, as they are people who are suffering. And of course we include all sentient beings with all our dedications. So on that note, we'll read the dedication of merits. By this merit may we overcome the defilements and gain omniscience. May I liberate all beings from the ocean of birth, old age, sickness and death. Page 10. Hearing the Mahayana teachings, whatever merit I have accrued, may all beings become stainless vessels to hold the Mahayana teachings. Courageous Manjushri knew all things, and Samantabhadra did likewise. Following all of their examples, I shall dedicate all these merits. May the excellent bodhicitta take birth where it has not yet done so. Where it has been born, may it increase freely without degeneration. We can say in Tibetan. So nam diye tamche zekpa nye, topne nyepe dranam pamjene, Kega na che bala drukbayi, sipet sole drowa drolwa shok, tekjo damchu rinchen yendile, dagi sonam taye gantopa, deni drokon techo dampechu, rinchen drema mepe nyugyoche, champao pawu jeta kenpadam, kontu zambo deyan dejentu, deda kunge jesu daglobchen, kewa didab tanche rabtungo, changchub sencho rinpoche, make kvanam kegyoche, kepa nyampa mepayam, gone gondu pelwajo. Thanks everyone. Rinpoche is due back next week, so thank you.